Welcome to video commentary for the Satellite Bible Atlas, Maps 112 and 113, the Negev, Part 1. Negev means south or dry. As can be seen on Map 12, today the Negev refers to the triangular-shaped region from the city of Beersheba all the way south to Eilat and Aqaba, port cities on a bay leading to the Red Sea. This area is 120 miles or 190 kilometers long. For the most part, the Negev is not sandy, but is a high, rocky desert. Let's overview the different regions on Map 112, starting with the northern Negev. In the Bible, the northern Negev is often called simply the Negev. Therefore, this region can be called the biblical Negev, pronounced Negeb in many English translations. For instance, in Numbers 13:17, when Moses sent 12 spies into the land of Canaan, he said to them, "Go up into the Negev, and go up into the hill country." As a relatively flat plain, the biblical Negev functions as an important east-west route, connecting the Mediterranean Sea to Transjordan, south of the Dead Sea. South of the biblical Negev is the wilderness of Zin, a region of rocky highlands that was the southern border of the Promised Land. Further south is the wilderness of Paran, also a rocky desert, where the first generation of Israelites who came out of Egypt died. Between the wilderness of Zin and wilderness of Paran is a huge crater, carved out in the past by a tremendous amount of rushing water. In Hebrew, a crater is Maktesh. This is Maktesh Ramon, the exalted crater. Note the site of Kadesh Barnea, just to the west of Maktesh Ramon. Kadesh Barnea was the main camp of the Israelites during the 40-year sojourn in the desert. On the southern end of Map 112 are Etzion-Geber and Eilat, port cities on a bay of the Red Sea that reaches to the Indian Ocean. The Arava is the long plain that stretches between the Gulf of Eilat and the Dead Sea. The Arava is part of the great Syro-African Rift Valley. East of the Arava is the high plateau called Mount Seir. Descendants of Jacob's brother Esau settled here and became known as the nation of Edom. North of Edom, between the deep Zered and Arnon River canyons, was Moab, a nation descended from Abraham's nephew Lot. Now, let's go back and take a closer look at the biblical Negev. Map 113 is a magnified version of the northern biblical Negev. At the center of the biblical Negev is the city of Beersheba, which means well of the oath or promise. The patriarch Abraham named the site when he made a covenant with the Philistine king of Gerar. But at the same time, Abraham confirmed his faith in God's promise that Abraham's own descendants would inherit the land. Keep in mind that towns like Beersheba in the Negev secured the route that runs from the Mediterranean Sea near Gaza to Edom, east of the Dead Sea.
We're standing in the region of Beersheba. You can see the modern city of Beersheba behind us. And it was the southern border of the heartland of Israel. For instance, David's census was taken from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south.
Here we are at Beersheba, and we are about to descend into a water system that dates back to King Hezekiah.
Both Abraham's and David's Beersheba was most likely located where the modern city of Beersheba is today. However, this nearby ruin, called Tel Sheva, is a good example of an Israelite period town. The excavated ruins here include a city wall, a city gate, houses, large rectangular buildings which were used as storehouses for grain, wine, and oil, an animal sacrificial altar, which was most likely removed during the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, and a deep shaft cut to gain access to water stored in caverns below the city. Water is scarce in the Negev, especially during the long, dry summer. Therefore, the Negev is a region where one must learn, like the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to trust in God for daily provision and protection. Between 10 and 14 inches of rain can fall each year during the winter season. When it rains, it can rain hard, and the normally dry stream beds, which drain hundreds of square miles of territory, converge into the brook Besor, which flows to the Mediterranean Sea just south of Gaza. Towns were built near the Negev wadis or streams for access to water. This mound is a ruin of an Assyrian fortress called Yurtza, built astride Nahal Besor, that flows toward the coast and the Mediterranean Sea. The normally dry, far-reaching, flowing streams in the Negev serve as a metaphor in Psalm 126 to describe the hope of exiled Israelites that God would bring them back to their land.
Hi, we're in the Negev highlands near where the Israelites wandered, and normally it's very dry here, but we've had a couple good rains lately, and as you can see, there's a lot of water here right now. Streams flowing in the desert.
Great.
Here we are in the town near the Beersheba in the biblical Negev, and it has been raining the last few days in the hill country. And you can see how the waters are rushing down through this stream, which is usually very, very dry. So the psalmist in Psalm 126 uses this image. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like streams in the Negev.
The western Negev blends into the agriculturally rich coastal plain. Note another tributary of the brook Besor, the Nahal Gerar. Note two important sites, Gerar and Ziklag. Abraham was a man of faith who believed God's promises. However, Abraham wasn't perfect and had occasional lapses of faith. At Gerar he lied about his wife Sarah. But Abraham was quick to realize his mistakes and return to God in faith. At Beersheba, Abraham not only made a treaty with his human neighbors, but reconfirmed his faith in God's promise that one day Abraham's descendants would inherit the land. Beersheba means well of the promise. Likewise at Beersheba, Abraham's grandson Jacob, even though he was leaving the promised land for Egypt, expressed faith in God's promise that God would bring Israel's descendants out of Egypt and back into the promised land. Like Abraham and Jacob, we are called to believe the promises of God. Map 5.4 shows that before he became king, David lived for 16 months at Ziklag. Like Abraham, David was another person who expressed great faith in God, but at Ziklag his faith lapsed. It is probably not a coincidence that two central people associated with God's promises, Abraham and David, temporarily failed in faith, so geographically close to each other. While David and his men were away from Ziklag, their wives and families were captured by a raiding band of Amalekites. The Amalekites then burned Ziklag. When David and his men returned to Ziklag and saw the devastation, David's own men wanted to stone him. But all this served to show David that he had not been living in faith toward God. He repented and asked God for direction. In pursuit of the Amalekites, they came to the brook Besor, where 200 men stayed with the baggage. 400 others continued the pursuit and were able to defeat the Amalekites and recover their families. This is a photograph of Tel Serah, likely the ruins of ancient Ziklag. In the eastern Negev, note the location of Tel Arad. Tel Arad has remains from both an early Canaanite city and an Israelite period fortress. The Canaanite ruins are visible in the lower part of the screen. The Canaanite city flourished at the same time as Sodom and Gomorrah to the east, probably in association with minerals mined from the Dead Sea. The Israelite or Judean fortress is on the summit of the hill. It was originally built around the time of King Solomon and went through a number of destruction and rebuilding phases. The fortress contained a temple or high place.
We're in Arad in the biblical Negev, and Nicole and I are standing here in the Holy of Holies of an Israelite temple.
In the Bible, these are known as high places.
And I'm standing in the Holy of Holies where there were standing stones and pillars for the burning of incense. And these places were condemned by the prophets and was probably destroyed by Hezekiah.
In the next video, the Negev, Part 2, we will take a closer look at the regions further south on Map 112. the wilderness of Zin, and the wilderness of Paran.
All right, Genesis 26, verse 6. So Isaac settled in Gerar. And then if you read later on in the chapter, you see that the herdsmen of Isaac's flock quarreled with the other herdsmen, and they dug wells to determine whose water belonged to whom. So we're standing right by a well here. This is possibly Gerar. It's Haror. Just behind us is the Wadi Gerar. You see a nice definition how it goes down nice and deep.